What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raff's, of course. We've got Jays we got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
I gotta say, of all the NBA players I would have selected to pull a Chris Webber, Steph Curry, nowhere near the top of that list.
It's a good call. That would not be in my first team all Chris Webber either.
Steve Kerr's reaction too. he, yeah, I don't think he could believe what had happened either. But they survived.
And now they have to go bet. Now they have to beat the Kings twice in 3 games. Okay. I would not have a hard time betting on that, but we'll see. Someone's got to win.
Still got to win in Sacramento.
Yeah, but are you really going to pick the Kings in Game 7 of a series against the Warriors, regardless of where it's being played?
Game 5, I want to say yes. Game 7, not so.
I didn't ask about Game 5.
I
asked about Game 7.
It's a fair point. It's finely poised.
Yeah, I'm not sure people understand how much it doesn't matter if the Kings are actually the good team, if the better team. If they get to 7 games, they're not going to win that game. I would offer up a lot of money that the Warriors don't win, that the Warriors win Game 7 of that series if they get there. But yeah, that's one of the better first round matchups. Kind of everything else has lost its juice a little bit, whether it be, I suppose, all things considered, in the Warriors. I mean, sorry, in the Lakers Grizzlies series, that's about as
juice there. Yeah.
And considering the injury to Ja's hand, Game 4 you're down 2-1, and apart from the really bad first quarter, things were competitive. In Game 3 is about as good as maybe you were going to get, but on the East side, nothing's exactly apart from the Heat Bucks. But I just kind of think that series was going to have zero juice no matter what happened.
And it's a question of, and same thing kind of with the Clippers Sun series. It's a question of injuries, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that series is fun if Miami can hang with a healthy Bucks, but it's not as fun when it's no Giannis. And if Giannis comes back, it probably gets less interesting. So
unless you're already down 3-1. It doesn't matter when if Giannis comes back completely healthy in Game 5. Winning 3 games in a row against the Heat is not going to be easy.
Right.
But
there's hope for that series, definitely.
I would agree. College basketball, that's what this podcast is about, and that's what we'll talk about today. Some movement, some momentum in the transfer portal. We're still kind of waiting on some of those tippity top names. Hunter Dickinson, we're still waiting for him to pick a school. Max Amos, also waiting for him to pick a school. But as you go through, last time we talked, a lot of the top 10, top 15 transfers were still waiting on what school they were going to pick. And there's still a reasonable amount of players, and some players that will make an impact on next year's season, that are waiting to make a decision on where they're going to play college basketball next year, whether that's Matthew Cleveland or Tyler Perry, Jalen Tyson from Texas Tech. But apart from Hunter Dickinson, some of those really, a lot of those really high ranked recruits have found a place to play next year, and a lot of them, and some of them have found their way to some storied programs that are now in a position to reload and have a go at title contention again next year. And 2 of those teams, Josh, are Gonzaga and UNC, 2 teams that I think relative to the last couple years, maybe this is more for Gonzaga than anybody else, than UNC, but it's been a little while since Gonzaga's direction the following season has really been in question. Whether it's because Chet Holmgren was coming in with a really awesome recruiting class, so you knew that was going to be a big part of the deal, or just the fact that Drew Timme is coming back,
Timme's existence,
is going to be around. Neither of those things are going to be true. There's not a stacked, we have the number 1 ranked player in the class type recruiting class coming into Gonzaga. And with Drew Timme leaving, and honestly, that team, and the Julian Strother and Rasir Bolton likely not there as well next year. It's one of those. It wasn't a spectacular season last year. It was a season that it was clearly not an elite Gonzaga team, and now we have a place where you're not totally sure about their direction. And over the last 7 days or so, it has been we officially have a direction for Mark View's program,
and specifically Friday morning.
Yes,
it was a 1-2 punch where you got two of the bigger names in the portal and snapped them up real quick. Yeah.
Yep, you're going to recognize the last name of the first guy, it being a Nembhard brother, of course, Andrew Nembhard, now a guard for the Indiana Pacers, I believe, very early second round. I think he was like the 31st pick of the second round. Has carved himself out a spot in the NBA very, very quickly. As I think he finished top three or four in maybe not in Rookie of the Year voting, but in what was on a lot of first team All Rookie ballots. His brother Ryan Nembhard, who spent his college basketball up until this point at Creighton, has made the jump to Gonzaga, and another Nembhard brother will play for Mark View.
Yeah, we talked about the Tommy Lloyd connection and the idea that it seemed like Ryan Nembhard was going to follow him to Arizona, and then Ryan Nembhard said, actually, I'll just go with the head coach that got my brother to the NBA instead of the assistant that helped with Andrew's recruiting from Florida, because, Tommy Lloyd is recruiting wizard man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hadn't really considered the possibility of Ryan Nembhard going to Gonzaga, and in hindsight, I probably should have given that more thought, because the minute it happened, you went, oh, right. They were always going to be a factor just because that family knows Mark Few so well, knows that school so well.
Yeah, and I think there's just some really obvious opportunity at Gonzaga heading into next year, right? And you put the Graham Ike being the other guy who committed on Friday morning. You combine those two things. I'm sure he knew that Graham Ike was on his way to Gonzaga, more than likely. I'm sure that wasn't a surprise to Ryan Nembhard when he made the decision. But you have a chance to go to a program that has been one of the best in the last 10 years or so, from an always being relevant winning games perspective, and certainly the last basically since that 2017 season, that 16-17 season. So that's 7-8 years of really high level play from Gonzaga. And if you're gonna you have to think that for the most part, like, Ryan Nembhard's gonna get the keys to that offense.
Yeah, I mean, he's more or less coming in to do what Andrew did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Different situation, because you don't have this ready-made juggernaut. But and this is, or was, the issue with Gonzaga last season, right? Is they didn't have a Ryan Nembhard. And we've talked about this also with Villanova, but with Gonzaga as well, that you can go trace the lineage through the guards, and specifically the point guards. And that player just wasn't there after Andrew Nembhard left. And so that's the most interesting part of this to me in terms of Gonzaga's ceiling next season. And Nembhard's impact in particular is, how important does that become when Drew Timme's not there?
Sure.
Because obviously it was a massive detriment to last year's team. It was what held them back, is they didn't have somebody that does the things that Ryan Nembhard does. Does the fact that you have one of the top 5 players in the country who is not designed to play on the perimeter with the ball in his hands, right, it makes it that much more important, because you need to be able to get the ball to Drew Timme. Now we're talking about a different conversation. Obviously, you had to fill that hole, and Ryan Nembhard obviously makes your team much better, and you needed players too, not just, and we'll get to the kind of the overall roster at the end. But I am just very curious as to what this does for Gonzaga's ceiling, because to me it was obvious last season that it would have made all the difference in the world. They would have been a national title contender. We're kind of in the reverse of last season, where the talent is the question, but they have the guy to run the offense. Yeah, and you don't get... Obviously, Nembhard would have had a really good opportunity at Creighton as well, but it's not every day you get to walk in and get the keys to Gonzaga to kind of... So it does make sense to me a little bit more why he would enter the transfer portal when this kind of opportunity is the one that he ended up taking.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure I agree with you that just having a great guard would have turned them into a complete national title contender, because they were still the number one offense at KenPom last year. Sure. Even though, and they were atrocious defensively for a national title contender. And Ryan Nembhard is I think Ryan Nembhard will. I mean, like, you can't play like that. You can't, like, if your point of attack isn't at least solid defensively, you can't be as good of a defense as Creighton was last year. But like, that was definitely the issue. I'm not totally sure their ceiling changes like drastically. If I mean, I guess if Ryan Nembhard is the one that's there, then probably so. But
I was thinking more in terms of the way we're talking about them, as you know, can they play good enough defense to get to a Final Four national championship game versus they're just not one of the best 10 teams in the country because of those two issues. And, well, maybe they can pull it together in March. But you're right. They probably didn't have enough. There were certainly times in the tournament where it looked like they didn't have enough defensively. Statistically, the numbers will say they didn't have enough defensively. That's a valid point. I meant more, and I chose my words poorly, but we would have had a different conversation about Gonzaga had they had that point guard position figured out. It would have been much more along the lines of Baylor, right? And maybe even a better version of that, because they were still a better team than Baylor.
Most of the time, I think KenPom is pretty accurate. I'm not totally sure. Like, would anybody tell you that Gonzaga was the best offense in the country last year? Would anybody?
I don't think so.
I watched them play UConn in the Elite Eight. That is not, like, the number one offense in the country doesn't get stonewalled like that.
Yeah. And maybe,
and all, their guard play was so bad last year.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe it's just because Drew Timme was that good from an efficiency standpoint, but it's one of those times that it's just like, that's one of those numbers that fails the eye test for me.
Yeah, to me they were not the well-oiled machine that previous, and I think this was pretty evident, but right, they weren't the well-oiled machine of years past. And maybe part of it is, okay, right, remember what they did to Alabama, and they also did play in the WCC, right? So it's going to look better from a numbers standpoint than from an eye test standpoint because of those things. Because and we said this all year, when it was
they also didn't turn the ball over at all last year. They were top 15 in the country in turnover percentage, which also helps.
There you go, that too. Right, we said this all season. When they're going, there's just nothing you can do about it. They can score 100 on anybody. The question is, how often do they get to that level? And there were, the first half against UCLA, what UConn did to them, there were clearly, even if KenPom thinks it's the best offense, there were clearly holes on the offensive side as well. Yeah.
And like, they're second in effective field goal percentage, 14th in turnover percentage, 22nd in 3-point field goal percentage, 5th in 2-point field goal percentage. It's not like the rest of the numbers don't paint the picture of the number one offense in the country. It's just when they played outside of the WCC last year, apart from maybe, the Alabama game, that you were like, I'm not totally sure this is where they would have ended up if they were playing even a Pac-12 schedule.
Yeah.
And then,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So the other part of this is what you get on the interior here. In a guy who has been bothered by injuries, missed last season because of an injury, but was really, really good 2 seasons ago.
Mm-hmm.
And a team that had no interior presence now has an interior presence, and a team that had no point guard now has a point guard.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a very interesting. I mean, they got a lot better a lot quickly. There were a lot of questions that got answered with these 2 additions. It's just kind of the exact opposite of everything last season. I'm fascinated to see how this plays out.
Yeah, and neither, like, the most important player that's coming back is, I mean, from an impact standpoint, is probably Malachi Smith, right?
If Malachi Smith comes back.
Right.
Right, we're still waiting on Anton Watson and Malachi Smith, which kind of swings this to a pretty significant degree.
Respectfully to both of them, they're stupid if they don't come back to Gonzaga next year. Respectfully. Like what? Like, you're gonna go? Like, neither of those guys are gonna be guaranteed an NBA roster. I just like.
From an NBA standpoint, there's definitely, I would agree that there's a really good opportunity here to increase your draft stock by being key contributors to this team. A team that needs more. Yeah.
I mean, Anton Watson is the official. He should be much better this year, but doesn't end up being that much more productive of college basketball.
He's so important, though.
Yeah, that's my point. He's not going to be important to a single professional basketball team next year, or he could be the 3rd most important player on Gonzaga on a national title contender. That would be silly to me. Respectfully. I mean, do what you want, but that would be, I mean, you could either fly private all year or go live in Fort Wayne and fly Southwest to go play G League games if you want to. It's fine by me. I'll just be disappointed because in theory, Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard are joining a team that, in theory, has 4 of their top 7 scorers returning from a year ago, assuming that Anton Watson and Malachi Smith come back. Nolan Hickman, Ben Gregg, still a team that made it to an Elite 8, and right then a rotation, a roster kind of starts to take shape with those other guys in mind. I mean, I'll say it now. Like, if those 2 guys leave, it doesn't matter. These transfers don't matter. They'll be a top 20 team all year because they'll beat everybody in the WCC like they always do. But that's not a national title contender if those guys don't come back.
Yeah, and that's the final point I wanted to get to.
Which makes me feel like that they like that's a question I'm asking if I'm Ryan Nembhard. Like, who from your team last year is coming back? Because, like, Ryan Nembhard on Creighton, and maybe he felt pushed out because they were looking at Stephen Ashworth. Like, if maybe there's some legitimacy to that. Maybe he had just decided after the year ended that he was going to leave, and that's why they were going at however it ends up. But like Creighton right now, when you look at preseason top 25s, Creighton is far ahead of Gonzaga in preseason rankings.
Oh yeah.
So I wouldn't totally understand I'm going to go somewhere and not be a title contender when I'm already the guy with the ball in his hands for a title contender. Like, that doesn't pass the out loud test to me if they're really worried that those guys aren't going to come back.
Yeah, and I mean, NIL is part of this too, but you don't think Gonzaga when you think NIL.
Right? No, probably should, right? I'm sure they have unlimited funds to pay guys.
When you're comparing that to Arizona or Texas or somebody, though?
Yeah, I think that I think there are a lot of people giving money to like the money available to the Texas men's basketball program in particular. Yes, I think Gonzaga is going to be on the same level as that, 100%. Well, let me put it this way: if it's not, Ryan Nembhard's not going to Gonzaga. You just said this is an NIL thing, and then just said that
a part of it. In terms of getting
okay, so what's the other part of it then? Because he's not getting more opportunity at Gonzaga.
You could argue
he's a starting point guard on both teams.
Yeah, you could argue he's got more responsibility with this team though, because the pieces aren't as good.
Okay.
Just from a thought process standpoint. And, Creighton is not the center of the NIL world. My point was Creighton's not the center of the NIL world either. Right. So looking at NIL opportunities, that's always just part of the equation at this point. But my big question for Gonzaga is kind of what you were talking about with, do they get these guys back, is do they have enough top-end talent? They're going to be good, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But we're used to Gonzaga having one of the best players in the country, right? We're used to Gonzaga having All-American caliber guys. Is that Ryan Nembhard? Is that Ike? Is that Malachi Smith? It's just a very interesting, again, it's the reverse of everything we kind of come to think about Gonzaga, and specifically last season. You knew you had the All-American. The question was the supporting cast. Now the supporting cast is significantly improved, but do you have the guy who's going to elevate you to a point where you can go beat any, he can be the best player on the floor against any team in the country kind of thing? Because you knew you had that in Drew Timme, and that's kind of where I'm now waiting to see, right, do they get what does this roster end up looking like, and can somebody become that guy? Because it could also just be a team of really good players that's the 14th best team in the country, but not really a factor when it comes to winning a national title.
The team that's come the closest to winning a national title at Gonzaga is not the 21 team. It's the 16-17 team. Mm-hmm. That team had one All-American.
Was that Clark?
Do you think one? No. Nigel Williams-Goss was the only All-American.
Okay.
He was the second team All-American that year.
I couldn't remember which.
And that was the second best team in college basketball.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Do you think, so the question is, because you don't, Nigel Williams-Goss wasn't anywhere near the best player in the country. You don't need somebody to be the best player in the country. You just need one guy to be one of the 15 best.
Right.
And I'm not totally sure that Ryan Nembhard or Graham Ike or Malachi Smith those would probably be the three guys that I would coin as. I mean, Graham Ike is 29, basically 20-9, 20-10 at Wyoming. It's not like he's going to go to the WCC and be shocked by the type of talent that he's playing against in the WCC. So I think there are contenders to be the Nigel Williams-Goss of this team, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But
now the other part of that is that there was another NBA player on that team too.
So are you telling me that there are multiple guys deciding whether or not they're going to come back to Gonzaga, but there aren't any NBA talent guys on that team?
I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying Brandon Clark was also phenomenal that season.
Sure.
Right. At Gonzaga, Malachi Smith, Anton Watson have not done what Brandon Clark did that season. Now, do they have the opportunity because of the playing time in the roster? Absolutely. Right. It's not that I'm dismissing them as a title contender. And you're also adding Steel Venters. That's your other transfer to give him a shout out here too. There is certainly enough talent here and enough pieces where, it could be one of those situations where you don't have Drew Timme, but you've got the third team All-American.
Also, Brandon Clark wasn't on that team. Brandon Clark was on the 2018-19 team. No, he played for San Jose State in 2016-17.
Oh.
The other guy on that team was the big Ukrainian, not Ukrainian, the big European.
Oh, Philip Petrusev.
No.
Oh. The other one.
Hold on. Przemek Karnowski.
Yes. Przemek Karnowski.
I mean, but Zach Collins and Jonathan Williams were also on those teams. Those were the other
Zach
NBA
Collins,
guys.
There's your other NBA player. My point stands.
Zach Collins. Talk about a
yeah.
Zach Collins,
it's not okay. I had in my head that Brandon Clark. Okay. Yeah. Never. I sort of take that back. So his
crazy season was 2018-19.
Okay. My bad. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
Sure.
So you did have, upside in Zach Collins. Karnowski was just a monster, which Ike could certainly, that's the kind of thing Ike could absolutely be this season, 100%. There's just a lot of it could turn out this way, right? Here's the best case scenario where it all works and they have all of these pieces that you need to be a national title contender and they get better defensively and all of that. There's just some assumptions you have to make to get there, is all I'm saying. And part of that is going to be, right, do you get Anton Watson back? Do you get Malachi Smith back?
I think you're right. Okay, on the UNC side, real quick, Gonzaga, better or worse from an optics perspective next year? Like on February 1st, do we feel better about this team or last year's team? Let's just assume that those guys come back.
Which one would I take? Preseason?
As in which one? No, on February 1st, which one is closer to being the best, to being a national title contender?
Oh, sorry, February 1st. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So kind of as we're preparing for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. And for the sake of conversation, just assume that everybody that can come back is coming back.
I mean, I have to say this one just because the bar isn't very high. Because by February 1st, it was just very clear they didn't have. Now, and I fell victim to getting excited about this too come NCAA tournament, but it was clear by February 1st they just didn't have what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
And the guard play wasn't good enough and the defense wasn't good enough. So from that standpoint, I feel like this team can at least be in that conversation where it's a really good team. They could beat anybody on their day. I just don't trust them to be consistent over 6 games to beat the best teams in the country, one after another in the NCAA tournament. To me, that's kind of the floor of this team is they're good. They're top 20.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't particularly scare you. So I would say this team, with the potential and the fact that some of those holes get filled, even with Timmy gone, I'll say you feel a little bit better about this team.
I think it's easily this team. Easily. This team will easily, like if all of those guys come back, this team will easily be more well-rounded than last year's team. Easily. Right. And from a do they have the infrastructure to make a deep run in the tournament, it's this team easily for me.
Right. Because Drew Timme doesn't check all, as good as he was, he doesn't check those boxes for you.
And quite frankly, in the most important games of Drew Timme's college basketball career, he was horrible. Like he just wasn't good enough.
That UCLA
Elite Eight against UConn. Okay, sorry, I forgot about the UCLA game. But my point being,
UConn game.
He's not a first round prospect because of 2 of his college basketball. Like he's just like when he plays guys that are actually physically capable of like defending him and bothering him, he's just not good enough. And the point being that Drew Timme was never going to be enough to take you all the way to a national to a Final Four. And last year, that's kind of what it turned into, was that sometimes it was only Drew Timme that you had to lean on, and that was ultimately
not enough.
That was, I mean, because like in that UConn game, he got into foul trouble, and the Gonzaga offense looked completely lost.
Oh yeah,
completely.
Yeah. Right.
But I also just think that there's some value to not having like one guy that everybody can kind of lean on.
Yep. You like this roster. You like this roster construction better by a mile. Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
By a mile. Yeah. Okay, that's Gonzaga. We'll see how the rest of this offseason looks and what roster they actually put on the floor in early November when the season gets underway. The other team that has reoriented themselves, took a look at the compass, and now they're on at least a new direction.
Headed in the complete opposite direction.
Perhaps is the North Carolina Tar Heels. Plenty of change going on with UNC. Of course, Caleb Love deciding to go to Michigan to play out the remainder of his college basketball eligibility, and that kind of left, and apart from the fact that they were just bad last year, that kind of leaves North Carolina in an interesting spot, Josh. And they have reloaded with with some names, and there are some names that some of them I'm not totally sure, like if they're just sexy because we know them as college basketball names, or if they're actually going to raise the ceiling really high for this North Carolina team. But nonetheless, some highly touted prospects, a four transfer class at the moment, and it starts with one of the best transfers that was left on the board until recently, and that's Harrison Ingram, coming from Stanford.
Yeah, and this is the team for me that I love the way this roster looks now. Because basically you get two things out of these four guys.
Mm-hmm.
You get a wing scorer that didn't exist in Harrison Ingram.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That team last year didn't have one.
Yep.
Now, his numbers were almost identical his 2 seasons at Stanford. He was good as a freshman,
mm-hmm.
and then he did the same thing as a sophomore. That gives me a little bit of hesitation and wondering, does he have anything more? Right? Because that Stanford team had potential last season. I remember talking about preseason. Can Harrison Ingram take another step and help elevate that team? And the answer was resoundingly no.
Unequivocally no. Yeah.
Now, does he need to be 18 points a game for this team? No, of course not. He's the, third option? Because you still have RJ Davis, you still have Armando Bacot, right? That's where your offense is. That's where your offense is based. So it's not like he has to be something.
Now, do I think that the best version of this team is Harrison Ingram being the number one option? Maybe. I think I'm willing to have that conversation. Just fundamentally, the 6'8" wing that can score being your number one option, yeah. For the modern game, yeah, that is your number one option, but it won't be.
Right.
And so to your point, like he's not going to average 18 a game.
Right. Or at least to have the ability to play that way when you need to. Right. Because there are a lot of teams Bacot can just kind of take care of himself.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to matchups, versatility, being able to win multiple ways, can Harrison Ingram be that guy that they didn't have last season, who is not a inefficient guard or a traditional low post big, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the problem. They had that guy in Brady Manick. Now, very different version, but they had a something else that could carry an offense. Can Harrison Ingram be that other option? Even though he doesn't need to be the leading scorer, but can he go get 25 in a game where Bacot's in foul trouble, or teams are doubling Bacot? Can he be the guy to benefit? And then, perhaps even more important than that, Cormac, Ryan, Paxton, Wojcik.
Wait, can we stop on Harrison Ingram here? Can we stop on? Are we gonna do the whole class and then kind of rotate and then kind of come back?
We can stick with Harrison Ingram.
Like he's not the guy that can go get you 25 when everyone's in foul trouble. He's not a single thing he's done in college was like, and maybe it was a Jared Haas thing at Stanford, but like why Ingram didn't have like the greenest light in college basketball last year is a little perplexing to me. And I don't know if it's right. Like I said, I don't know if it was a Jared Haas thing, if it was a like he's never scored more than 20. He scored more than I'm just looking, like he only scored more than 15 points once last year. He had 24 against Florida State at the beginning of last year in November 25th. And he only got to 15 5 more times all season. I'm just curious, like I'm very curious, and like I think we'll kind of, as we get further removed from Brady Manick, we'll start to appreciate how good Brady Manick was even more. Like Pete Nance came as a guy that was like Pete Nance regressed, like didn't have less responsibility. Like Pete Nance regressed. At least I thought he did. So I'm just curious. Because like it might look very, very similar next year, and maybe that's ends up being a good thing. But if Harrison Ingram comes in and averages 10 points on only 40% shooting, I'll be interested to see how much that changes North Carolina's ceiling, because you're also like, you'd love for him to be better than that. And he's not like he shot 3 free throws a game at 60%. So like I'm not totally sure like I'm not totally sure he's a 3-point gonna help spread the floor, which is
yeah,
which is like I also am like so are we just gonna have like he's definitely gonna have some ability to hang out like in the high post area, so we can have some high low kind of thing going on with Armando Bacot. Maybe that's helpful. Just like and maybe this is where you're getting, but like
yes.
I don't think that Harrison Ingram is the most important transfer that UNC is going to get. He's
Yeah.
the sexiest name that they're going to get, and he's the most touted transfer that they're going to get, but he is not the most important transfer they're going to get. Like we can play this game
unless he becomes something he's not right now.
Sure, I mean, sure.
And it's easy to talk yourself into the.
But two guys just need to come do the things that they did at the other school that they played for.
Right.
So I'm much more curious and interested in banking on that than banking on Harrison Ingram to go from just not a great 3-point shooter to a guy who you have to respect all the time. And the one thing that everybody looks at this point when it comes to determining if there's more in the tank than we've seen is free throw shooting, and shooting 59% from the free throw line last year does not suggest that it's there.
Yeah. And so he, from a skill standpoint, I feel like he kind of is who he is, and maybe he can improve somewhat shooting, which makes him, competent, not a great 3-point shooter. Maybe he can hit 70% of his free throws. Yeah, there are reasons to believe that you can get more out of him, and it's also easy to trick yourself into believing he's something that he's not, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of this balance of, is there actually more there, and if so, how much? Because then, are we going to talk about the other 3 guys?
Yeah, just last days, when you look at like I said like too many times. I apologize. I listened to I said it again. I listened to a 2-minute stint of our podcast the other day and said it a million times. So I apologize. When you look at Harrison Ingram's rankings in the transfer portal, and when you look at Stanford last year, it just doesn't make any sense that his minutes played went down and his shots per game went down, and all it is just, it's super intriguing, kind of like if I would have transferred too. I would have transferred too. So it'll be interesting to see where his numbers are next year and what his role is on next year's team.
Mm-hmm.
But please continue to the next transfers.
Yeah. So the other 3 guys are the ones who hypothetically solve the problem. Because Cormac Ryan, 35% 3-point shooter for his career, shot over 40% 2 seasons ago, 2021-22. Now, is he a 40% 3-point shooter? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
But is he at least 35? Absolutely. Paxton Wojcik shot 38% from 3, averaged 15, 7, and 3. Jalen Withers shot 42% from 3. Now, 9 points, limited scoring. So it's a question of how much do these guys actually contribute. But all of a sudden, instead of having 0 reliable 3-point shooters and 6 guys you trust, we're talking about you adding 4, 3 of whom have proven to be good between serviceable and very good 3-point shooters at the college level. 2 RJ Davis and Armando Bacot. So that already gets you at 6 guys. Not to mention the rest of the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no longer this shot selection issue, the log jam, and the fact that they just couldn't shoot the basketball last year.
Mm-hmm.
Hypothetically, that is no longer a problem because all of the supporting guys you're bringing in, with the exception of Ingram, are good 3-point shooters. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
I don't think it's a coincidence either. I'm interested. The rotation of this roster, and how they exist together, I find very intriguing, because Like, does Cormac Ryan start on this team? How if they have a shooter, like how bad defensively is their best shooting lineup? Because Cormac Ryan was one of the most important players on one of the worst Power 5 defenses in the country last year. And no offense to Paxson, but Paxson doesn't exactly look like a guy who's going to lock a guy down. I mean, he can shoot the heck out of the basketball. He absolutely shoot it. His lefty stroke is enviable. But this is the biggest issue was absolutely the shooting last year. And right, Pete Nance didn't come in and be Brady Manick, and pretty much everything fell off the rails after that.
And it's not like last year's backcourt was elite defensively either.
Right. So that's my point. Is does the lineups that make the most sense offensively, are they going to be good enough defensively next year? Because Cormac Ryan and RJ Davis in the backcourt, like I'm eating that for breakfast. if I'm a high level backcourt in college basketball. So I just think I just like that's that when it, like I think UNC will be better next year because their shooting should be better, and Armando Bacot should have more room to maneuver. I think
and it actually makes sense.
Right, which is what I was saying.
Right. The roster, yeah. I just wanted to actually articulate that the roster makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And we decided that it made complete sense last year because it brought back everybody except Brady. Like the thing that made the thing that made 2 years ago UNC make sense was Brady Manick.
Right.
Everything he did then turned everything else into something that made sense.
Yes. And we thought that they had that last year, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Right.
I just feel better with having 3 options for that than saying it has to be Pete Nance.
Right. But it might not matter if they're horrible defensively. That's the point I'm getting to.
From a ceiling standpoint.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, does it ultimately, they could be, are they going to be a team that's top 3 in college basketball in offensive efficiency and sub 50 in defensive efficiency? Because if that's the case, then they're probably not going to be a national title contender, at least not a true one. And they'll be on all the lists of, this is the list of teams. It's my least favorite thing, by the way. Like, and not because it's incorrect, because it was accurate. UConn was on the list of teams that could quote unquote win the national title, but it's just lazy to me. Well, it was not Baylor. Like Baylor, you had to have a better defense than 22 until Baylor won the national championship, and now it's 22 kind of thing. But I think there's a world in which the narrative with UNC coming down the stretch is, man, it's really hard to stop them, but they don't get anywhere near enough stops, and there's going to be so much pressure on their offense to carry them as deep as they want to go. But it's going to look very, very different, and it should be fun. It should be really fun to watch with, RJ Davis with the ball in his hands. It's the other thing I'm like in the back left corner of my head. It's like, okay, what if RJ Davis wants to score, right? Because it's not like both he and Caleb Love were super worried about facilitating. That's the other thing. That's just like sitting, he's having a drink over in the back corner. Like there's a corner booth. He's there, and we'll see if he has too many and becomes an issue at the bar, kind of thing.
And that was the final thing I wanted to touch on is 100% valid concern. I'm less worried about the impact, though, when it's not 2 guys. Right? Because RJ Davis playing one-on-one, because you got 2 shooters on the floor and Harrison Ingram with Bacot, and you can't leave any of them. And, Ingram's cutting to the basket or whatever. That's not bad. That's good offense too. The problem becomes when you take Bacot out of the equation because the guards won't give the ball up. And if RJ Davis doesn't have it, it's Caleb Love. And you're not particularly scared of the rest of the players on the perimeter.
Sure.
Right. So having now you have 3-point shooters, a dominant big, and one ball dominant, somewhat inefficient guard.
And 0 true point guards. That's the
right.
point I'm making.
Right. And so
1 or 2, I don't care. There's not a true point guard on the team.
Right. To me, that is less of a worry when it's one player. However, again, I'm thinking about in terms of improvement from last season. I think you're focused more on national title potential.
Right. It's UNC. I'm not interested in thinking about it any other way.
Sure. And so it becomes a question of, are they, Gonzaga from last season, where can't stop them sometimes, but you also don't necessarily trust the player, in this case RJ Davis, to run the offense efficiently, to get the ball to Armando Bacot where he needs it. Yeah, there are certainly, I am in no way, shape, or form ready to crown this team one of the 5 best in the country and a national title contender. They should be much, much better. I am very excited to see what this looks like. The potential is obviously very exciting. But there are some questions that still need to be answered before UNC ends up being talked about like they were at the beginning of last season.
Oh, I'm not totally sure they're going to be good. I'm not totally sold on that.
What is good?
Top 20?
Okay.
I mean, RJ Davis, Armando Bacot, and a bunch of guys that played losing basketball next year. I mean, that's what you got. Harrison Ingram's numbers went down in conference play. Cormac Ryan was on one of the worst Power 5 conference teams in the country. And you know how I feel about transfers coming from mid-majors. So
in Jalen Withers' case, Louisville.
Right. Oh, and Jalen Withers. Like, if there was anybody worse than Notre Dame last year in Power Conference play, it was Louisville. So I think there might be some overcorrection with UNC heading into next year, that people who are scarred by the fact that they were saying things like, I think UNC has a chance to be historically good. I saw that in preseason last year. That maybe they don't give guys enough credit on this UNC team, but I'm not totally sure they're going to be great. I don't think they're going to be great. I'm not totally sure they'll not be disappointing, but we'll see.
I feel good. I will say I do feel pretty good about their floor.
And what's their floor?
Not super high, safely into the NCAA tournament, 6-7 seed kind of thing.
Okay.
Where last season,
I would probably agree with that.
Last season, loved the ceiling, also was terrified about the floor. Didn't articulate it as strongly as I should have, but we both kind of said, you can't just assume they're going to be what they were in the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There was this idea that if it goes bad, it could go really bad. And that's what, now, I didn't think it was going to be as bad as it was. But we both were kind of on this might just not work, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like this team has that problem. The problem this team has is you saw what that group could do. You knew if it all clicked, they could beat anybody in the country. They could win a national championship. This team has a long way to go to prove it's on anywhere near that level, even though some of the pieces are the same. I'll agree with you there. I'm optimistic that it's going to be a much better season for UNC. I'm not ready to go throw UNC back into it was a 1-year blip. They're going to be right back competing for a Final Four. Yeah, there's some things that need to be proven before we get to that.
And maybe it'll be an expectations thing more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
That dictates, at least nationally, how people feel about UNC's season. Because if they're, I'm looking at Gary Parrish's top 25-1 right now,
mm-hmm.
and this is from, so we're recording, it's 9:06 on Monday morning, the 24th. This is from the 21st, so Friday night. And UNC, unless I miss them, UNC is still not in this top 25-1. So the point being is that if they finish 16th in the country, that will feel a lot different than even if they had finished 16th in the country this year.
Right. Now, the other part of that is, this is, like you said earlier, this is UNC.
Right.
That's
not the internal expectation.
Right. And that's where I don't operate in that space, because there's part of me that just doesn't, you could say the same thing about Indiana. Was Indiana's season a failure because it was Indiana and they only made the second round of the NCAA tournament, round of 32? No. Because that was an incredibly important step forward for Indiana, considering where Indiana was.
Mm-hmm.
Right. To me, sure, North Carolina should be better. Sure, it's embarrassing North Carolina missed the NCAA tournament. But you can't just operate in a world where you assume because of the name on the jersey that that group of players should be doing X, Y, Z, right? You got to take it season by season. You can say overall North Carolina's program isn't meeting expectations, mm-hmm. which is a different conversation, a conversation that has a lot more to do with Hubert Davis. But I'm more focused on the actual year to year, because things happen. Sometimes programs just have down times, right? It's, Duke had that one terrible season. Now, they weren't exactly down for long, but also Duke haven't really been, except for making the Final Four last 2 seasons ago, they haven't exactly been a major factor the mm-hmm. past handful of seasons, right? So, yeah, there's 2 different conversations to be had, and I hope we don't get them confused.
Wait, what was that last one about Duke? Did you say something about Duke? Sorry, I was reading. Right, I was looking at stats.
Past few seasons outside of making the Final Four.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that part was.
Yeah.
They were the best team in the sport 2 years ago.
Probably, sure. By the time they
were certainly the most talented team in the sport. 1,000%.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't the best team in the sport, but they were the most talented team. 1,000%.
Right. So that was sandwiched between under 500, just over 500 season? I don't even remember.
I mean, you can dock them for the COVID year if you want to. I certainly won't.
And a last season where they were good, seemed to have things going by the NCAA tournament, and then lost to a Tennessee team that they should not have lost to.
In the first year of a new head coach.
Right. I'm not trying to say that Duke is, going away or anything like that. My point is just, North Carolina is not the only blue blood that has down seasons. The only one that basically doesn't is Kansas.
Sure.
That's all. I was using Duke as an example to say even Duke hasn't been what you would expect from Duke.
Sure.
In the totality of the past 3 seasons.
Sure. All right. Anything else on UNC?
No.
Who has a higher seed in the tournament, UNC or Gonzaga?
Higher meaning better?
Yeah.
Gonzaga.
Higher meaning closer to 1.
Gonzaga.
I think you're probably right. Like, even if they're they'll still be a 4 seed because they'll win so many games.
Too. And they'll win enough non-con games against good teams because they play so many of them.
Yeah. I mean, Gonzaga was not first, single, second. Did anybody think Gonzaga was better than UConn? Except maybe at the very beginning of the season. And Gonzaga was still the higher seed in the NCAA tournament. It's kind of crazy to think about.
I mean, UConn did lose 7 Big East games?
Sure. They still had a better resume than Gonzaga, definitely. For my money.
Yeah, definitely.
Gonzaga just wins so many games. Right. That's the point I was making. They just win so many games.
Right.
Do you think that we feel better about Gonzaga than UNC on Selection Sunday, regardless of where they are seated?
In terms of winning
in terms of, I mean, you can pick whatever you want there. Are they a trendier Final Four pick than Gonzaga? Are there more people picking UNC to go to the Final Four than Gonzaga?
I'll say I feel better about Gonzaga.
I think that would be the answer I would go with as well. It's interesting though.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
I think I'm good.
Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod. And we'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.